With mainstream media often focus on national and global stories, we have invited Cathy Edwards, Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Community Television User and Stations Cactus, to join us to discuss the importance of why local media plays a crucial role in keeping community voices strong, protecting local identity, and adapting to a changing media landscape. Stay tuned. Thank you, Cathy, for joining us. Please just introduce yourself to our audiences so we can get to know you better.
My name is Cathy Edwards. I'm the founder and executive director of the Canadian Association of Community Television Users and Stations, or most of our members call the organization Cactus for short. It's a not-for-profit association that represents not-for-profit community TV stations in Canada like Skyrise Media.
Thank you. Now, why is local community TV still important for smaller or underserved regions? And how does it help keep local identity alive?
Well, I think community TV is more important than ever because there's been so many closures and regionalization in the private sector. I think the CBC is holding its own, but there's just been so many newspaper closures and big commercial radio and TV station closures. So I think its importance has actually grown in recent years. And it has a significant role to play because it's so cost effective. Because community TV is managed by a local not-for-profit board and it collaborates with local organizations and members of the community to make the programming, it's super cost efficient. So it's actually possible in smaller remote communities where you're never going to see a commercial broadcaster.
Yeah, thank you. Cathy, what are the biggest challenges community media organization facing keeping local programming going, and what solution might help them?
The biggest challenge right now is funding. So when community TV policy was sort of formalized by the CRTC in the 1970s, it was managed by cable companies. So the cable universe at that time, there was like more than 50 little mom and pop cable companies across the country. They were all really excited about doing community programming. There was only about 30 channels on your cable subscription. Back in the day, 80% of Canadians had cable, so most people could see it. And the cable companies were required to spend 5% of their subscription revenue. You know, when you pay your cable bill, 5% of that went to supporting the community channel. And so they were very accessible, and the model worked really, really well until the late 1990s when satellite came in as competition for cable. Cable market share started to drop. Then people were cutting the cord and going to, online services. And so during that same period, also cable companies were consolidating. So those little mom and pop operations were getting bought up by big companies like Rogers, Shaw, Cogeco, Videotron, and they were consolidating resources. So whereas you used to have little tiny cable head ends all over the country and you were microwaving signals out to them, and then they were going out by the cable to the community, and so it was easy to insert local signals. They started fiber optically connecting them all, and suddenly they were shutting down all these production studios and just keeping ones open in big cities. So the whole cable production model just stopped working in the late 1990s and 2000s. And we brought that to the attention of the CRTC like through 3 public hearings now. But with the case that the money that's collected by cable companies to make community TV should actually be made available to communities themselves. There's lots of stations like yours now that have not-for-profit boards. They want to be in small communities, even though the cable companies don't anymore, that the money should be collected and distributed to not-for-profits that want to do that work. And in 2016, the last time the CRTC reviewed its community TV policy for Canada, there was about $150 million collected coast to coast for community TV. But by that time already, most of the small production communities had been, shut and consolidated in big centers. So just to give you an example, there used to be 12 neighborhood offices in the Vancouver area alone where your viewers are located. It was sort of like a public library model. You could go access equipment at your local office. You didn't have to, go to downtown Vancouver to get hold of a camera. And then slowly they were all shut. And there was just the Shaw Tower downtown. And then finally, even that was shut after the 2016 policy. And so there's no community TV in Vancouver anymore, except not-for-profits like yours that are entrepreneurial enough to pop up and try to find some other source of funding. So we think that the ship is slowly turning in that in 2023, there was a new Broadcasting Act announced, and we did lots of hard lobbying with the help of groups like yours to underscore the continuing importance of community TV, as to your first question, and that there should be funding for it. It should be sustainable. It's really important with other media closures. And the government heard that. So there was unanimous support by all parties. There was a very strong new definition of the role of the community element in the broadcasting system in the new Broadcasting Act. And there's really strong language that it should be available from coast to coast. It makes an exceptional contribution to the goals of the Act, and it should be sustainable. So the CRTC is now in the process of implementing that law. So they have to make that high-level kind of language work on the ground. And so we're in the middle of a series of hearings where we hope that finally a community access media fund, we're calling it, will be set up, and funding from the big cable companies, satellite companies, and now the cross-border streamers would be put into a fund to support local programming. And the basic idea, why should those entities have to do it? It's the same argument it was 30, 40 years ago with cable, is that because they're pulling subscriptions out of communities and flooding communities with foreign content, that there should be some quid pro quo, that they should be expected to put something back into communities with that money.
Very well. As you said, programmings or a station like us who's been working for 26 years. First, we're working with the, cable companies, and then now we're still with cable companies, but we are struggling, as you said, and it's very hard to find the right resources. Now, from your experience.
Jump in there for a second. The only reason you happen to be on cable is because you're an ethnic broadcaster and they have a channel called Omni. But for the rest of the community groups that used to produce in the Vancouver area, like there used to be a rock and roll show for new talent. There used to be what it's called. There's like politics and civics shows. If you wanted to have an LGBTQ show, or all these different groups that make up Vancouver society have nowhere to go. The ethnic groups can go on Omni, but everybody else is just out of luck.
And that's understandable. Now, from your experience at Cactus, what obstacle do LGI journalists face in producing high quality local journalism, and how can this be solved?
So the LGI is the Local Journalism Initiative. So it's an initiative of Canadian heritage that was introduced in 2019. And the idea is to fund journalists' salaries and then a tiny bit of equipment. But it was kind of conceived initially for the newspaper sector. We just need to, one journalist with his or her laptop can just, write a story. And when it was implemented, we and the community radio sector made a good case, we thought, that we should be included because people also watch radio and TV and get their news that way, that those media should be included. And so we are in the program. I think the tricky thing in radio and TV, this is the challenge for the LGI journalists, is that the grant only pays for the journalist's salary. And I mean, television and radio are team efforts. You need camera operators, people to do the lighting, people to do the microphones. If you're shooting in a studio, you might need 3 cameras. So it's not something you can do with the journalist alone. Now, ideally, you have volunteers to help you, but it's a big mandate to be doing the journalism and training volunteers at the same time. So I think you can kind of do it if you had a good volunteer pool and good studio infrastructure before you started. But if you're starting from scratch, it can be tough.
Thank you, Kathy. Now, with mainstream media focusing on wider coverage, how does community TV make sure that local voices and stories like civic stories are heard?
Well, this relates back to the earlier question about why community TV is important. When you say that bigger media focusing on broader coverage, I think you mean more regional coverage, because a lot of the local media has disappeared. So again, that makes community TV ever more important. And because community TV by definition is operated by a local not-for-profit, facility is local, it's made by local people who have to access that facility, it's filling the gaps. So that's its importance. And it fills gaps in geographic news coverage, so all the smaller remote communities that don't have access to regional coverage from newspapers, other radio or TV stations. But also, its mandate is specifically to give a voice to underrepresented groups. So, big media is getting better now because there's a lot of incentives, but for a long time, the only place, say, a Farsi language program would be on community TV, because the doors are open for anyone to go in and make a program. You don't have to make a case commercially to a big TV station that you can sell tons of ads because there's so many millions of Farsi speakers. So this way, you don't have to make a commercial rationale. Anyone can come in and use the platform. So for example, the first LGBTQ program in Canada was on community TV in Calgary in the 1980s. I was there. There's programs made by deaf people when I worked in Calgary. So all of these groups can have access. So it's about hyperlocal coverage, and it's about diverse coverage.
Mm-hmm. Very well said. Now, given the financial limits on community broadcasters, what new founding module or strategy have worked well in keeping local media sustainable?
It's barely sustainable. So, for example, there used to be over 300 community TV stations on cable back in the day when there was 100 million or more per year to spend and divvy up among those 300 stations. That gives you a bit of a budget if you do a napkin calculation of about $300,000 per station. So, as I said, most of those stations have been shut. The not-for-profit ones that have sprung up to fill the holes, there's only about 25 in all of Canada outside Quebec. In Quebec, there's more. There's 40 just inside Quebec because they get funding from the province. So the Quebec Ministère de Culture funds them.
Mm-hmm.
And also, the CRTC historically has kind of leaned and put pressure on the Quebec cable companies to support the not-for-profits. So they get some money, kind of in the order of $30,000-$40,000, maybe like one employee paid for by their local cable distributor as well. So in Quebec, it's sustainable. Outside Quebec, those 25 stations that we have survive on, you were talking about sponsorships the other
Yeah.
day. Some people do some ads and sponsorships, but it's tough.
Mm-hmm.
A few of them that are successful have municipal support. So whether the municipality has given them free space in a building, for example, we have another instance where there's free space in a public library. That's also a municipal infrastructure. So they're not worrying about the lighting and the heat and the space.
Yeah.
Some people, a really successful form of funding for community radio and TV actually, is bingo.
Mm-hmm.
Very popular in a lot of small communities. So we have some stations that will raise a couple of $100,000 in bingo. We have other stations that do really well with project funding. So because of the social service mandate of community media, a lot of them can apply for a seniors grant to teach media literacy to seniors and teach, show them how to use cameras and TVs, or youth grants for media literacy, or combating bullying. You could do talk shows about bullying. So there's all these federal grants available, and sometimes city level and provincial grants too, that you have to have a particular output with the programming that you're doing. So they're really great in a way because they highlight our mandate, how flexible we are and how important local communications are, because you can use it for so many different things. The challenge with them is they're not operational funding. So you've got to kind of cobble together out of all those grants, 5% here, 10% there, enough to pay your administrator, to keep the lights on, to keep the studio doors open. Another one of our stations has historically, although less now, almost completely self-funded by selling DVDs. Like they'll go to a sporting event and they'll be literally ripping copies of the hockey game, and people are buying them as they go out the door. These are parents of little leaguers and stuff. They still do some of that. Tape digitization of family archives. Some do telethons. And I think that's the main ways that those 25 fragile stations are surviving right now. But this is why it's so important to have this community access media fund that could provide some basic operating funding and do training of volunteers and support, for example, journalists when they come in on a specific program grant like the LGI.
Yeah, especially like community TV, like us that who underserves community like for Farsi speaking languages. Now, as a digital platform and social media change, the media landscape, how can community TV grow while keeping its public service role?
Well, digital platforms have been great for community TV. For example, every one of our members, although a few have over the air licenses, a couple are lucky enough to be carried on satellite because of an accidental CRTC decision a decade ago. They're all online. Like you can launch at very low cost just online without any of that expensive distribution infrastructure. And it's also a really easy way to archive your content. So even if you still have one of those over-the-air linear licenses where people watch, program after program, if you miss it, you can go to a website and see it over again. You can monetize your content if you think people are going to download it. So, I think digital platforms have just opened things up for community TV. There's no downside. And I know that about a decade ago, it was at the 2010 community TV hearing, one of the CRTC first hearings, where we went and said, look, this cable money really should be for not-for-profits because cable isn't doing their jobs. That was the first hearing that the Cactus got involved and really made that argument strongly. They said to us, well, now everyone's got camcorders or they can shoot on their phones and you've got YouTube. Why do you still need community TV? It was very short-sighted. And we said two main reasons. One is YouTubers in their basement, tech-savvy kids. Well, there's actually three reasons. Tech-savvy kids don't cover council. They don't provide that basic civic function. You need a not-for-profit board with a specific mandate to cover the community to get that kind of stuff done. Secondly, you need bricks and mortars production spaces where people can mix and brush shoulders and generate ideas together. Because it's when you volunteer for my show and then I go back and volunteer for your show that we really become a community and we start to have dialogue. So I remember when I worked as a volunteer coordinator in Calgary, for example, we used to have, as I mentioned, we had the first LGBTQ show. And just down the hall on a different night of the week, we had the Chinese Pentecostal church. And they would come in with treats and cookies and everything every week. And so some of the volunteers from the LGBTQ show ended up volunteering to do camera on the Chinese Pentecostal church show. And those groups who had never spoken before started to speak over cookies and in the studio. So that's the other thing. You need bricks and mortar spaces in the community where you can meet. And the other thing is not everybody's technically savvy. So, YouTubers may know how to cut a video and throw it up online, but what about the 50, 60-year-old that wants to launch a business online? Like, how do you do that? How do you use digital tools? And the digital tools keep changing. So what if you want to, and this is something I've been teaching at Cactus, use a 360-degree camera to cover council maybe? Or what if you want to use VR because it's an interesting new tool to engage youth? Like there's all this new audiovisual technologies, and you need somewhere in the community where people can try that. That's media literacy. So there's all these reasons why community TV is so important. And I think the reason community TV in Canada was included in the local journalism initiative that Heritage started up is because that ship is turning and they're getting it. Social media, well, look, misinformation and disinformation. There's no fact checking. When you have a local not-for-profit that's elected by a community, if you try to pass something on that station that's not true or slander somebody's going to say something. Somebody's going to complain to that board, and that show will be taken off. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why it's super important. even in the digital age, or more so in the digital age.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you, Cathy. All the stuff that you just said, it is very informative and it's very important, especially to community TV, local community TVs. Now, for our viewers, what message would you like to share with our viewers?
With Vancouver area Farsi community, you mean?
Yes.
I guess the message I would share is that they may have gotten used to a service over the years because it's been going for a long time and not realize how much work it is, how much volunteer help you need to keep it going, and how fragile it can be. That they really need, that you really need their support on all those levels. And it doesn't have to be financial. Just coming and saying, I want to learn how to do an interview and doing a show, or I want to tape the play on at my kid's school, or whatever it is that you need the help, and it's the help that makes community TV possible.
Thank you, Cathy. I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. And I would like to add this, that in a world where headlines often feels distant, community TV remains close and reminding us that every story, no matter how small, deserves to be heard. And I just wanted to thank you for joining us today. It was the information that you've given us, it was very informative, and thank you. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, I think you covered it all, Sherry. You did a fantastic job. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to come and chat to your viewers from a national perspective about services like yours.
Well, thank you. And thank you for watching. Please email us your comments. Your email and your comments are very important to us. Our email address is skyrisemediasociety@gmail.com. My name is Sherry Soltani, LGI journalist. Thank you for watching.